A serene farm, generations of legacy. Then, a dust cloud on the horizon. Bringing armed men with malice and intent to seize, they see a quiet black woman, an easy target for their racist land grab. They are utterly unaware that Commander Amina Brooks, the farmer they threaten, is a retired Delta Force leader. Their arrogance will shatter, their violence will backfire, and their scheme will expose a conspiracy far larger than they imagined. The morning sun beat down on Amina Brooks's land, baking the rich soil of her ancestral farm. Sweat beaded on her brow as she wrestled with a stubborn fence post, her muscles coiling with a familiar strength. This farm was her legacy, a testament to generations of her family's resilience. For 2 years, it had been her sanctuary, a quiet retreat from a life she had purposefully left behind. The uniform, the medals, the classified missions, those were memories she didn't display in picture frames. They were etched into her very being, a part of Commander Amina Brooks, a retired Delta Force operative who now simply wanted to be a farmer. A dust cloud rose on the horizon, obscuring the familiar silhouette of the county road. Amina paused, her hand instinctively dropping from the fence post. 6 vehicles, a mix of beat-up trucks and SUVs, rumbled closer, their tires spitting gravel. They didn't belong. This wasn't a friendly visit from a neighbor or a delivery. The sight of them triggered an old alarm in her, a cold prickle she hadn't felt since her last rotation in a hot zone. She watched them approach, her gaze sharp, assessing. The lead truck, a lifted Ford, screeched to a halt at the edge of her property, its engine roaring like a caged beast. The others fanned out behind it, forming a crude blockade across her access road. Doors slammed. A dozen men spilled out, white, burly, and armed. Shotguns, hunting rifles, and sidearms glinted in the harsh sunlight. Their faces were grim, some hidden behind sunglasses, others contorted with a sneer of entitlement. They moved with a practiced, aggressive confidence, like predators scenting prey. One of them, a man with a crude, snarling beard and a worn cowboy hat, stepped forward. His name, Amina knew from hushed whispers in town, was Vance Collier, a local figure notorious for strong-arming minority landowners off their property. His family had been circling her land for months, making thinly veiled threats. And now, here they were. Amina remained by the fence, outwardly calm, her posture defiant. Collier's voice, thick with menace and a fabricated drawl, cut through the quiet morning. "Well, well, if it ain't the proud little lady farmer?" His cronies chuckled, a low, guttural sound. "Heard you been having trouble keeping your fences up. Missy, land's looking a bit untended. Maybe it's time someone with proper experience took it over." He gestured vaguely at her perfectly maintained fields, then spit tobacco juice onto the dusty ground near her boots. "This land is tended. It's mine," Mina stated, her voice even, devoid of inflection. Her eyes, however, held a steel that few had ever seen and lived to dismiss. "And these fences are doing just fine. You and your men are trespassing." Collier's grin widened, a cruel flash of teeth. "Trespassing now, that's a funny word coming from you. See, folks around here, we know how things work. This land, it's been in our families for generations. You folks just passing through." His implication hung heavy in the air. A blunt, racist attack. Several of his men shifted, bringing their weapons into more prominent view. One of them, a younger man with a nervous twitch, raised his shotgun slightly. "I'm not passing through. My family has owned this land since before yours knew what a plow was," Amina retorted, her gaze unflinching as she locked eyes with Collier. She knew the history, the struggle, the systemic theft that had plagued black farmers for decades. This wasn't just about land. It was about erasing history, about stripping identity. Her family had fought too long and too hard for her to back down now. "That's ancient history, darling," Collier scoffed, taking another step closer. "What matters is now. And right now, we're telling you, this land needs new management, or things could get ugly." He paused, letting the threat sink in. We're giving you one chance. Pack your bags, get out. We'll even help you load your belongings. Amina's jaw tightened. She took a slow, deliberate breath, the scent of parched earth and distant pine filling her lungs. You seriously misunderstand the situation. Mr. Collier. Oh, I understand it just fine, he sneered, nodding to his men. Two of them began to move towards the dilapidated barn, their boots crunching on the gravel. Another headed for the rusted gate of her pasture where her small herd of goats grazed. The blatant disregard for her property, the casual assumption of ownership, ignited a cold fire within her. This wasn't just intimidation. It was a raid, a public act of aggression designed to break her spirit. Stop, Amina commanded, her voice suddenly sharper, cutting through the murmurs of Collier's men. It wasn't a plea, it was an order, delivered with an authority that had once commanded respect in the most dangerous corners of the world. The men paused, caught off guard by the unexpected shift in her demeanor. Collier's eyes narrowed, a flicker of surprise mixed with annoyance. Or what? Lady, he challenged, his hand moving towards the pistol holstered on his hip. You gonna stop us yourself? His men snickered, their confidence returning. They thought they had her cornered, an isolated black woman on a remote farm, an easy target. They had no idea who stood before them. Amina's gaze swept over the armed group, analyzing their positions, their weaponry, their readiness. She cataloged every detail, her mind already running calculations, devising contingencies. The quiet farmer was gone, replaced by a ghost of her former self, a flicker of the tactical genius that had once led America's most elite fighting force. The situation had escalated from a threat to a direct confrontation. And Amina knew, with a certainty that settled deep in her bones, that the line had just been crossed. The peaceful facade of her retirement was about to shatter. Not with a whimper, but with a roar. The shift in power, though unseen to them, had already begun. Collier chuckled, pulling the pistol from his holster with a practiced ease. Last chance. Lady, move. His men watched, their expressions a mix of anticipation and boredom, ready for the easy capitulation. They expected fear, a retreat. What they got was a calculated, almost imperceptible shift in Amina's stance. Her weight subtly redistributed, her shoulders squared, her eyes, previously focused on Collier, now scanned the perimeter, assessing every man, every weapon, every potential angle of attack or defense. This wasn't a farmer anymore, it was a hunter. You've chosen poorly, Amina stated, her voice dropping to a low, resonant tone that commanded attention. Overriding the snickers of the armed men, it was the voice of a commander, not a victim. Before Collier could react, before his finger could even twitch on the trigger, Amina moved. It wasn't a wild, desperate lunge, it was a fluid, precise blur of motion. She closed the distance between them in two impossibly quick strides, her hand a lightning strike. Collier's pistol, still half raised, was wrenched from his grasp with a sharp, dislocating twist of his wrist. A choked cry escaped him as his hand flopped uselessly. Amina didn't hesitate. The pistol was in her hand, its weight familiar, comforting. She didn't point it at Collier. Instead, with a flick of her wrist, she spun, the barrel arcing smoothly. Click, click, click. Three precise, near-simultaneous movements. The safeties on the three closest shotguns, held by Collier's most aggressive henchmen, were disengaged. The men, startled by her speed, froze, their minds struggling to process what had just happened. This was not the timid black woman they had envisioned. Drop them, Amina commanded, her voice like steel, her eyes, now blazing with an intensity that bordered on feral, fixed on the man closest to the barn. He hesitated, his shotgun still aimed vaguely at her. The moment stretched, thick with unspoken challenge. Then, a sharp, almost imperceptible tremor ran through the man's hand. He swallowed hard. The glint in Amina's eyes was not fear, but a promise of overwhelming force. He dropped his weapon. It clattered against the dusty ground, a sound that echoed disproportionately loud in the sudden silence. The other two men, their safeties now off, exchanged nervous glances. They had seen the speed, the precision. They had seen Collier's twisted wrist, his face pale with pain and shock. Their shotguns followed suit, hitting the ground with dull thuds. Collier, cradling his hand, stared at Amina, his bravado replaced by a dawning comprehension of his monumental mistake. "What in God's name?" he muttered, his voice hoarse. "My name is Commander Amina Brooks," she said, her voice clear and precise. "And for 22 years, I served in the United States Army. For 12 of those years, I led elements of Delta Force." The words hung in the air, a shocking revelation that landed with the force of a physical blow. The armed men, who minutes before had swaggered onto her property with entitled arrogance, went rigid. The younger man who had raised his shotgun earlier looked as if he might vomit. Delta Force. The name itself was a whisper of elite, brutal efficiency, a force shrouded in secrecy and unmatched lethality. Collier's face drained of color. His jaw worked, trying to form words, but none came. The casual racism, the assumed superiority, crumbled under the weight of her identity. He had just threatened and attacked a decorated, highly trained, combat-hardened officer from one of the world's most formidable special operations units. This wasn't some naive farmer. This was a warrior. "You want to claim this land," Amina continued, her voice devoid of emotion, her gaze sweeping over the remaining armed men. "You want to test my fences. You want to see what happens when you threaten my home." She took a deliberate step forward. "You're about to get a lesson in property rights that none of you will ever forget." She didn't need to draw on her memories of classified missions. The instincts were etched into her bones. Every movement economical, every decision instantaneous. She moved with an unsettling calm, a predator assessing its cornered prey. Her left hand, still holding Collier's pistol, pointed to the remaining men, not directly at them, but towards their weapons. A silent, deadly suggestion. Her right hand, free, subtly adjusted her stance, preparing for whatever foolish move they might attempt. One of Collier's men, a burly figure named Jed, who had been guarding the path to the main house, made a desperate lunge for a discarded rifle. Amina reacted. It wasn't a punch or a kick. It was a precise, almost clinical block and counter. Her right hand intercepted his arm mid-reach, twisting it sharply. A sickening crack echoed, followed by Jed's scream as he crumpled to the ground, his arm rendered useless. The rifle clattered away. The remaining men froze, their eyes wide with disbelief and terror. The sudden, brutal efficiency of her movements was a far cry from the easy intimidation they were accustomed to. They had walked into a trap, not of location, but of mistaken identity. Their prey was the hunter, and they were caught. The tension in the air was palpable, thick with the scent of fear and the dust of shattered expectations. The power had shifted irrevocably. Collier's men, once emboldened by their numbers and weapons, were now a scattered, disoriented group, facing a single, formidable force they profoundly underestimated. Amina stood in the center of it all, calm, resolute, the weight of her secret now a terrifying weapon in her hands. Vance Collier and his humiliated crew didn't linger. They scrambled back into their trucks, leaving behind the 3 discarded shotguns and Jed, who lay writhing, clutching his mangled arm. The roar of their engines faded, replaced by the ringing silence of a farm that had just witnessed a battlefield. Amina watched them go, her posture still coiled, the pistol a cold, solid extension of her hand. Her breath was steady, her mind already shifting from immediate threat assessment to strategic forecasting. This was far from over. They would not forget this humiliation. And Collier, in particular, would seek retribution. Amina knew his type men who couldn't tolerate being bested, especially by a black woman, within hours. The local sheriff's department arrived, not with the urgency of a distress call, but with the measured crawl of a patrol car on a routine assignment. Sheriff Brody, A man whose paunch strained the buttons of his uniform and whose loyalty was known to bend towards local power brokers, stepped out, followed by two deputies. Brody didn't look at the abandoned weapons or the bruised earth. He looked at Amina, his expression carefully neutral, but his eyes held a subtle accusation. "Ms. Brooks," Brody began, his voice slow and deliberate, "we received a report of an altercation. Mr. Collier claims he was assaulted, and that you threatened him and his men with a firearm." He gestured vaguely at the pistol still in Amina's hand. "Says you caused grievous bodily harm to one of his associates." Amina's jaw tightened. The corruption was swift and predictable. Black farmers in the U.S. have historically faced systemic discrimination, including racist violence and inaction from the legal system, which often did little to protect them. They had been denied fair treatment from agencies and faced outright violence from mobs trying to drive them from their land. "Sheriff," Amina stated, holstering the pistol with a deliberate click, "Mr. Collier and his armed men trespassed on my private property. They threatened me, attempted to intimidate me, and were actively trying to vandalize my property when I defended myself and my land. The firearm I used was his. He assaulted me first by bringing an armed mob onto my farm with the intent to illegally seize my property." Brody frowned, his gaze flickering to the discarded shotguns. "Well, that's not quite how Mr. Collier described it. He says he was merely attempting to inquire about some property line disputes, and you became aggressive." His deputies shifted, one of them picking up a shotgun, examining it with a detached air. Amina felt the familiar pressure of a system designed to protect the powerful, regardless of the truth. Local county committees, often composed of affluent white landowners, had historically been biased against black farmers seeking assistance or loans. The next week brought a relentless barrage of bureaucratic warfare. Amina received official notices from the county, a summons to appear in court regarding excessive force and assault charges filed by Vance Collier, followed by a bewildering array of citations for minor farm code violations that had never been enforced against anyone else in the county. Broken fence posts, a slightly overgrown pasture, the placement of her compost heap, every trivial detail was weaponized. This wasn't about justice. It was about bleeding her dry through fines and legal fees, forcing her into compliance or, ideally, off her land. Black farmers often had limited resources to challenge discrimination or protect their property. Then came the true escalation. A notice from the county zoning board, delivered by a stiff-faced clerk, declared a significant portion of her land under review for potential public utility easement acquisition. It was a flimsy, transparent attempt at eminent domain, a tactic historically used to seize black-owned farms, sometimes for public works projects that never materialized. Amina knew this was Collier's handiwork, leveraging his local influence to undermine her ownership through official channels. The threat of losing her land, not through direct force but through legal maneuvers, was a deep, insidious cut. She spent sleepless nights poring over property deeds, legal texts, and online databases. Her military training had ingrained in her the importance of intelligence gathering. She documented every incident dates, times, names, specific violations, photographs of her perfectly maintained property contrasting with the alleged neglect. She recognized the pattern, a slow, calculated squeeze, designed to exhaust her resources and spirit. The constant harassment wore at the edges of her composure, not in a way that shattered her, but in a way that sharpened her resolve, hardening her intent. Subtle acts of sabotage began. The water pump to her irrigation system broke mysteriously. A section of her fence, already repaired, was found deliberately cut, allowing her small herd of goats to wander, creating a minor nuisance for a nearby farmer who was known to be a casual acquaintance of Collier's. Threatening. Anonymous calls came at odd hours, filled with racial slurs and veiled warnings to know her place. Amina knew these were designed to isolate her, to make her feel vulnerable and alone. The historical context of black farmers being denied access to loans and resources, and the subsequent economic loss and land loss, weighed heavily on her mind. But it also fueled her determination. Amina reached out to a few trusted, discreet contacts from her former life, not for direct intervention, but for intelligence, for insight into legal loopholes and systemic weaknesses in local governance. She sought out information on how to navigate the very legal and administrative maze that was being constructed around her. She was a master of unconventional warfare, and this, she realized, was simply a new kind of battlefield, a war of attrition waged with paperwork and prejudiced authority. The challenges were immense, echoing the historical struggles of black landowners. Farter, the pressure mounted daily. The summons for the assault charge required a costly lawyer. The zoning review meant she had to hire surveyors to refute the county's claims. Every step she took was met with another obstacle, another demand for time, money, and emotional energy. The system, like a relentless enemy, sought to break her down piece by piece. Amina knew this was the point where most people would capitulate, where the sheer weight of fighting an entrenched, biased system would force them to sell their land at a fraction of its worth. But Amina Brooks was not most people. The abuse was escalating, pushing her to the edge, but it was also igniting a cold, tactical fury within her. The quiet farmer was gone, replaced by a strategist preparing for a counter-offensive that would be as unexpected as it would be devastating. The stage was set for an act of defiance. The escalating pressure did not break Amina. It sharpened her focus, igniting the tactical mind she had honed for decades. Collier's legal and administrative attacks, the subtle sabotage, the constant threat. These were not random acts. They were a systematic campaign, a war of attrition designed to exhaust her resources and spirit. Amina recognized the strategy. It was a siege, and she was preparing to break it. She needed proof, irrefutable evidence of the conspiracy and the full extent of Collier's illegal activities and the county's complicity. Her surveillance began simply. She installed motion-activated cameras along her fence lines, not the cheap, visible kind, but military-grade, disguised units she had sourced through a discreet channel. She mapped out the weak points of her property, anticipating their next move. The subtle acts of sabotage were her intelligence. The cut fence, the damaged pump, the anonymous calls, each was a data point, helping her build a profile of their methods and weaknesses. But a siege required more than just defense. It required an inside track, eyes and ears where she couldn't be. She found them in Mrs. Elsie Mae Johnson, a woman who lived 2 properties over, a seemingly frail octogenarian with a perpetually creaky porch swing and a reputation for knowing everything that happened within 5 miles of her home. Elsie Mae had watched generations of black farmers lose their land to fair deals and unexplained misfortunes. She held a quiet fury and a surprising network of eyes and ears among the older, overlooked residents of the county. Elsie Mae was underestimated, not just by Collier, but by almost everyone. Amina visited Elsie Mae under the guise of discussing local produce, but their conversations quickly veered into the darker undercurrents of the county. Elsie Mae, with her sharp memory and even sharper wit, recounted instances of Collier's family stretching back decades, vague property disputes always ending with the land falling into their hands, sudden inspections leading to fines, and neighbors mysteriously selling out. She knew the back roads Collier's men used, the blind spots in Sheriff Brody's patrol routes, and the local hangouts where Collier's cronies boasted after a few beers. They cut old Mr. Henderson's irrigation pipes just before his harvest, back in '07. Elsie Mae recounted, her eyes gleaming with a quiet anger. Claimed it was faulty equipment. But I saw Jed and his brother's truck parked down by the creek that night, and they were too quiet when they left. This was the intelligence Amina needed. She shared her own experiences, her voice devoid of emotion, focused purely on facts. Elsie Mae, recognizing the precision and resolve in Amina, became her silent partner. Elsie Mae offered more than just information. She offered her own property, her intimate knowledge of the land, and the willingness to act as a decoy. My granddaddy had a little shed out back, right on the county line, barely visible from the road. Elsie Mae whispered one evening, her voice low. It's been empty for years. They might use it to cross through to your south field. No one would think twice about me having a few cameras hidden there. Old woman setting up trail cams for deer. You know, Elsie Mae's suggestion was brilliant. It was exactly the kind of inconspicuous observation point Amina sought. Working under the cloak of night, Amina installed more cameras, placing them strategically on Elsie Mae's land, aimed at the key points of ingress and egress Collier's men had been using. She also set up high-quality audio recording devices, sensitive enough to pick up whispers from a distance. The aim was not just to catch them trespassing, but to capture their intent, their instructions, their casual boasts of wrongdoing. The waiting was agonizing, but Amina had learned patience in the desert. Then, one night, the cameras tripped. The footage showed Jed and another of Collier's men, the one Amina had disarmed, creeping through Elsie Mae's property, using the old shed as cover. They were heading towards Amina's pasture. The audio crackled, then cleared. Collier wants this done quiet-like. Jed grumbled, his voice thick with frustration. Says the sheriff's getting heat about our last visit. Needs us to make it look like she's just incompetent. So, we let out the goats again, the other man asked, his voice low. Nah, worse. We hit that pump again, properly this time, and maybe we leave a little something that looks like vermin, contaminate her water source, make it unusable for a bit. She'll have to haul water or get expensive filtration. County will jump on her for unhealthy conditions. They didn't see the tiny, almost invisible lens tracking their every move, nor the microphone picking up every damning word. Amina watched the footage, her face grim. They were escalating, moving beyond mere harassment to active sabotage that could cripple her farm and risk her livestock. The vermin suggestion was particularly insidious, a direct threat to her livelihood and a clear attempt to force her hand through public health regulations. The proof was clear conspiracy, intent to commit further damage, and a clear connection to Collier's orders. This was it. This was the opening. Amina reviewed the footage again, noting the timestamp, the faces, the clear intent. Elsie Mae, watching over Amina's shoulder, merely nodded, her eyes fierce. Got him, she whispered, a triumphant gleam in her eyes. The power had begun to shift. Collier and his men thought they were operating in the shadows, leveraging their influence and impunity. But Amina had just pulled back the curtain, exposing them to the harsh light of their own actions. The next move was hers, and it would not be subtle. The county courthouse buzzed with a manufactured tension. Amina Brooks sat ramrod straight at the defendant's table, her face a mask of calm resolve. Across the aisle, Vance Collier sat flanked by his lawyer, a smirking man in an expensive suit, and a still sore-armed Jed. Sheriff Brody occupied a seat near the prosecution, his presence a clear sign of the county's endorsement of Collier's narrative. The courtroom was packed, drawn by the local gossip of a black woman farmer attacking prominent landowners. A few local reporters scribbled notes, their faces eager for a sensational headline. The judge, a man with tired eyes and a reputation for upholding the status quo, called the court to order. Collier's lawyer launched into a theatrical opening statement, painting Amina as a volatile aggressor, a danger to the community, and a trespasser on Collier's good intentions. He detailed Jed's injury, exaggerating the severity, and presented Collier's fabricated account of a friendly inquiry about property lines. Sheriff Brody then took the stand, his testimony carefully crafted to corroborate Collier's story. Portraying Amina as uncooperative and violent, he described the armed standoff in Amina's unprovoked assault, omitting any mention of Collier's men being armed or trespassing first. Amina listened, her expression unreadable. She let them spin their web, knowing that the tighter they wove it, the more spectacular its unraveling would be. Her own lawyer, a young, earnest public defender who had initially seemed overwhelmed by the political weight of the case, had been briefed by Amina with precise, unwavering instructions. He rose for cross-examination. Sheriff Brody, the lawyer began, his voice gaining confidence. You testified that Miss Brooks brandished a firearm unprovoked. Is that correct? Brody nodded. That's what Mr. Collier stated. And she was holding a pistol when my deputies arrived. And you confirmed it was Mr. Collier's pistol. Did you not? Sheriff Brody hesitated. Well, yes, but that doesn't change the fact. Objection, Your Honor. Speculation, Collier's lawyer interjected. Sustained. Stick to the facts. Counselor, the judge said, his gaze drifting to Amina. Amina's lawyer pressed on, his voice firm. Sheriff, in your professional opinion, given your years of law enforcement experience, would you say you are familiar with standard military-grade tactical equipment and procedures? Brody scoffed. I've dealt with my share of veterans. Counselor. What's your point? My point. Sheriff, are you aware that Commander Amina Brooks is a decorated, retired officer of the United States Army who served for over 2 decades, including 12 years in Delta Force? A collective gasp swept through the courtroom. The reporters froze, their pens hovering over their notepad pads. Collier's face, which had been smug moments before, went slack with shock. Sheriff Brody visibly flinched, his eyes wide. The judge, for the first time, sat up straighter, his tired eyes now sharp with sudden interest. Amina, maintaining her composure, subtly nodded to her lawyer. He didn't need a flashback. The sheer weight of the revelation was enough. It hung in the air, transforming the perception of her from a vulnerable farmer to a formidable, highly skilled combatant. The narrative of her being an unprovoked aggressor instantly crumbled. Your Honor, Amina's lawyer continued, his voice ringing with newfound authority. We have evidence that not only corroborates Miss Brooks's account of self-defense, but also exposes a clear conspiracy of harassment, intimidation, and deliberate sabotage against her property by Mr. Vance Collier and his associates, with the implicit knowledge, if not direct assistance, of certain local authorities. He then produced a small, nondescript USB drive. Your Honor, we would like to present video and audio evidence obtained from Miss Brooks's property and a neighboring property that directly implicates Mr. Collier's men in further acts of trespass and a detailed plan to unlawfully damage Miss Brooks's farm. Collier's lawyer jumped to his feet, sputtering. Objection, hearsay, improperly obtained evidence, Your Honor. Amina's lawyer countered calmly. The cameras were on private property, documenting ongoing criminal activity. This is direct evidence of a conspiracy. The judge, now thoroughly intrigued by the sudden turn of events, leaned forward, approached the bench. Counsel, after a brief, hushed conversation, the judge, his face grim, nodded. Given the extraordinary nature of the allegations, I will allow the presentation of this evidence. Let it be played. The courtroom's large screen flickered to life. The first clip showed Jed and another of Collier's men, their faces clear, creeping through Elsie Mae Johnson's property under the cover of night. The audio, crisp and undeniable, played their conversation. Collier wants this done quiet-like. Jed's voice echoed through the silent courtroom. Says the sheriff's getting heat about our last visit. Needs us to make it look like she's just incompetent. Then came the damning detail. We hit that pump again, properly this time. And maybe we leave a little something that looks like vermin. Contaminate her water source. A horrified murmur rippled through the gallery. The camera then zoomed in on Jed's face, illuminated by the night vision. The second clip showed the men at Amina's water pump, tampering with it. And then a close-up of a small, dead rat being placed near the intake. The audio detailed their smug satisfaction. The images on the screen, the chilling voices, the casual discussion of sabotage and contamination. It was a devastating blow. Collier sat frozen, his face ashen, his lawyer frantic. Sheriff Brody stared at the screen, his own complicity now glaringly obvious in the face of such clear evidence. The reporters, initially scribbling, were now openly recording, their phones raised, capturing the live unfolding of a public disgrace. The air crackled with shock and outrage. The power had not just shifted, It had violently inverted, exposing the aggressors as the true criminals, and the quiet farmer as the ultimate victor in this initial, explosive confrontation. The projector word, casting the damning images of Jed and his accomplice, contaminating Amina's water supply onto the large screen. Their whispered conspiracy amplified for the entire courtroom. The chilling details of their plan, the casual cruelty in their voices, ripping through the manufactured narrative of the prosecution. A collective gasp, then a ripple of murmuring, spread through the gallery. The judge, his face now a thundercloud, hammered his gavel. Order, order in the court. Vance Collier's lawyer, visibly shaken, scrambled to his feet. Your Honor, this is outrageous. This evidence is unverified, potentially doctored. It's a blatant attempt to derail these proceedings. Doctored, Mr. Henderson, Amina's lawyer retorted, his voice resonating with righteous indignation. The timestamps are clear. The faces are clear. The intent is clear. This is not just a derailment, Your Honor. This is the exposure of a systematic campaign of harassment, sabotage, and attempted economic ruin against a law-abiding citizen, spearheaded by Mr. Collier, and regrettably, enabled by certain elements within local law enforcement. He cast a pointed glance at Sheriff Brody, whose face had gone from ashen to a sickly green. The judge slammed his gavel again, silencing the mounting uproar. He stared hard at Collier, then at Brody. Mr. Collier, you have brought forth charges of assault, claiming a simple property dispute. This court has just witnessed evidence that appears to contradict your testimony, showing clear intent to commit criminal acts against the defendant. He turned his gaze to Sheriff Brody. Sheriff, your testimony regarding Ms. Brooks's alleged aggression now stands in stark contrast to the documented actions of Mr. Collier's associates. This is a serious matter. He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. Then, with a decisive tone that left no room for argument, he declared, based on the compelling and disturbing evidence just presented, I am suspending all proceedings related to the charges against Miss Brooks, effective immediately. Furthermore, I am ordering an immediate and thorough investigation into the activities of Mr. Vance Collier and his associates, as well as a review of the Sheriff's Department's handling of this case. He leveled a stern gaze at Brody. Sheriff, I expect your full cooperation. This is not a request. Before the words had fully registered, two plainclothes officers, who had been sitting inconspicuously in the back of the courtroom, rose and approached Collier. Mr. Collier, you are under arrest for conspiracy to commit felony criminal mischief, property damage, and attempted contamination of a water source. You have the right to remain silent. Collier's jaw dropped. He tried to speak, but the words caught in his throat. His lawyer, Henderson, sputtered protests, but they were drowned out by the rising clamor in the courtroom. Reporters surged forward, flashbulbs popping, microphones thrust towards Amina. The scene was pure chaos, a public spectacle of justice unmasked. Collier, pale and humiliated, was led away in handcuffs, his carefully constructed facade of respectability crumbling before the eyes of the entire county. Sheriff Brody, meanwhile, was cornered by his own superiors, who had been present in the courtroom, their faces etched with fury. The phone calls were already coming in from state and federal offices. The revelation of a decorated Delta Force commander being targeted by local corruption, especially one involving racist motivations and attempts to seize land, had gone viral the moment the initial shockwaves hit the internet. The public outcry was immediate and fierce. Social media exploded with the story, fueled by the live recordings of the courtroom drama. Delta Force commander fights racist land grab. Local sheriff implicated in conspiracy against veteran. Justice served in small town showdown. Headlines screamed across national news sites within minutes. Brody was immediately placed on administrative leave, a prelude to a full investigation that would likely end his career. His deputies, those who had picked up the discarded shotguns and stood idly by, were also pulled in for questioning. The local police force, usually a slow-moving, insular entity, was suddenly thrown into a whirlwind of internal and external scrutiny. Amina, still composed, watched the unfolding chaos. She hadn't sought revenge, but justice and justice, when delivered with surgical precision and undeniable evidence, was a powerful weapon. The silence that had initially greeted her revelation now morphed into a roar of public support and condemnation. Her status as a Delta Force commander transformed her from a lone, vulnerable farmer into a symbol of resistance against systemic injustice. The power had not just shifted, it had evaporated from the hands of her oppressors, replaced by the crushing weight of public opinion and legal consequences. The tide had definitively turned. The initial shockwaves of the courtroom revelation and Collier's arrest reverberated far beyond the small county. The story of Commander Amina Brooks, the quiet farmer who was secretly a Delta Force legend, battling a racist land grab orchestrated by local power brokers, became a national sensation. Journalists, initially drawn by the drama, now delved deeper, uncovering a history of similar land disputes, disproportionately affecting minority landowners in the region. Amina, usually private to a fault, recognized the unprecedented leverage this public spotlight offered. This wasn't just about her farm anymore. It was about exposing a systemic injustice. She strategically began to speak to the media, not with emotional appeals, but with the precise, factual demeanor of a seasoned intelligence officer briefing her command. She presented her evidence, not just the courtroom footage, but the meticulous documentation of every harassing phone call, every minor sabotage, every county citation. She highlighted the historical context, speaking calmly about the long, painful history of Black farmers was losing their land, often through dubious legal means or outright violence. She didn't seek pity, she demanded accountability. This isn't an isolated incident, Amina stated in a televised interview, her voice steady and clear, her gaze direct into the camera. What happened to me is a pattern, one that has systematically dispossessed Black families of their generational wealth and land for decades. Vance Collier is just one face of a larger problem. The system that allowed him to operate with impunity, the lack of oversight, the complicity of local authorities, that's the real target. Her words resonated, fueled by the undeniable evidence she presented. The county's internal investigation, initially intended as a damage control exercise, quickly escalated. State and federal agencies, spurred by public pressure and the high-profile nature of the case, began their own probes. Sheriff Brody, already on administrative leave, faced formal charges for obstruction of justice and abuse of power. Several of his deputies were also implicated, their careers effectively over. The district attorney's office, sensing the shift in public opinion and the overwhelming evidence, upgraded the charges against Collier to include racketeering, conspiracy, and hate crimes. Recognizing the systemic nature of his intimidation, Amina didn't rest. She leveraged her newfound platform, not to celebrate, but to educate and organize. She met with other Black farmers in the county and surrounding areas, many of whom had similar stories of harassment, unfair property assessments, and forced sales. Their fear, once isolating, began to dissipate in the face of Amina's courage and the collective momentum building around her. She helped them gather their own documentation, connecting them with pro bono legal aid and investigative journalists who were eager to expose more stories. She founded a nonprofit organization, Roots and Resilience, dedicated to protecting minority land ownership and providing legal and financial assistance to farmers fighting similar battles. Her old Delta Force unit, though maintaining their anonymity, provided discreet, invaluable support security assessments, digital forensic experts to analyze county records for patterns of discrimination, and even logistical support for community meetings she organized. They weren't fighting a war, but they were certainly supporting a strategic operation. The local news, which had initially been hesitant, now featured daily updates on the unfolding corruption. Whistleblowers within county offices, emboldened by Amina's actions, began to come forward, providing inside information on other dubious land deals and biased committee decisions. The public backlash against Collier and his network was immense. Businesses that had been complicit in his schemes faced boycotts and protests. His family's historical claims to various properties were being re-examined by state attorneys, potentially leading to widespread legal challenges. Amina's farm, once a target, became a symbol. People from across the state, and even some from out of state, came to offer support, to volunteer their time, or simply to witness the strength of the woman who had dared to stand up. The quiet sanctuary she had sought was gone, replaced by a new kind of mission, one she embraced with the same unwavering dedication she had once brought to the battlefield. She was no longer just defending her land, she was fighting for the land and livelihoods of an entire community, turning the chaos she had unleashed into a powerful, unstoppable momentum for justice and exposing the deep, insidious roots of corruption. The initial shockwaves of the courtroom revelation and Collier's arrest reverberated far beyond the small county. The story of Commander Amina Brooks, the quiet farmer who was secretly a Delta Force legend, battling a racist land grab orchestrated by local power brokers, became a national sensation. Journalists, initially drawn by the drama, now delved deeper, uncovering a history of similar land disputes, disproportionately affecting minority landowners in the region. Amina, usually private to a fault, recognized the unprecedented leverage this public spotlight offered. This wasn't just about her farm anymore. It was about exposing a systemic injustice. She strategically began to speak to the media, not with emotional appeals, but with the precise, factual demeanor of a seasoned intelligence officer briefing her command. She presented her evidence, not just the courtroom footage, but the meticulous documentation of every harassing phone call, every minor sabotage, every county citation. She highlighted the historical context, speaking calmly about the long, painful history of Black farmers losing their land, often through dubious legal means or outright violence. She didn't seek pity, she demanded accountability. "This isn't an isolated incident," Amina stated in a televised interview, her voice steady and clear, her gaze direct into the camera. "What happened to me is a pattern, one that has systematically dispossessed Black families of their generational wealth and land for decades. Vance Collier is just one face of a larger problem. The system that allowed him to operate with impunity, the lack of oversight, the complicity of local authorities. That's the real target." Her words resonated, fueled by the undeniable evidence she presented. The county's internal investigation, initially intended as a damage control exercise, quickly escalated. State and federal agencies, spurred by public pressure and the high-profile nature of the case, began their own probes. Sheriff Brody, already on administrative leave, faced formal charges for obstruction of justice and abuse of power. Several of his deputies were also implicated, their careers effectively over. The district attorney's office, sensing the shift in public opinion and the overwhelming evidence, upgraded the charges against Collier to include racketeering, conspiracy, and hate crimes. Recognizing the systemic nature of his intimidation, Amina didn't rest. She leveraged her newfound platform, not to celebrate, but to educate and organize. She met with other Black farmers in the county and surrounding areas, many of whom had similar stories of harassment, unfair property assessments, and forced sales. Their fear, once isolating, began to dissipate in the face of Amina's courage and the collective momentum building around her. She helped them gather their own documentation, connecting them with pro bono legal aid and investigative journalists who were eager to expose more stories. She founded a nonprofit organization, Roots and Resilience, dedicated to protecting minority land ownership and providing legal and financial assistance to farmers fighting similar battles. Her old Delta Force unit, though maintaining their anonymity, provided discreet, invaluable support security assessments, digital forensic experts to analyze county records for patterns of discrimination, and even logistical support for community meetings she organized. They weren't fighting a war, but they were certainly supporting a strategic operation. The local news, which had initially been hesitant, now featured daily updates on the unfolding corruption, Whistleblowers within county offices, emboldened by Amina's actions, began to come forward, providing inside information on other dubious land deals and biased committee decisions. The public backlash against Collier and his network was immense. Businesses that had been complicit in his schemes faced boycotts and protests. His family's historical claims to various properties were being re-examined by state attorneys, potentially leading to widespread legal challenges. Amina's farm, once a target, became a symbol. People from across the state, and even some from out of state, came to offer support, to volunteer their time, or simply to witness the strength of the woman who had dared to stand up. The quiet sanctuary she had sought was gone, replaced by a new kind of mission, one she embraced with the same unwavering dedication she had once brought to the battlefield. She was no longer just defending her land, she was fighting for the land and livelihoods of an entire community, turning the chaos she had unleashed into a powerful, unstoppable momentum for justice and exposing the deep, insidious roots of corruption. The legal battles dragged on for months, a grueling test of endurance. Collier, facing an onslaught of federal charges and public condemnation, tried every maneuver possible, from appeals to intimidation tactics against potential witnesses. But Amina, backed by a formidable legal team she had assembled through roots and resilience and the quiet, persistent pressure from her former unit's network, remained unyielding. The public interest never waned, fueled by ongoing reports from investigative journalists who uncovered more layers of corruption in the county's land management and agricultural loan offices. The final showdown arrived not in a courtroom, but in a small, nondescript meeting room deep within the county courthouse. It was a mediated settlement hearing, a last-ditch effort by Collier's lawyers to mitigate his impending prison sentence and salvage what remained of his family's reputation. Collier, gaunt and pale, sat opposite Amina, his usual sneer replaced by a desperate, haunted expression. His empire of intimidation and land theft was crumbling. The mediator, a stern federal judge brought in specifically for this complex case, laid out the terms. Collier faced decades in prison, massive fines, and the forfeiture of illegally acquired lands. His family's vast property holdings, much of which had been accumulated through dubious means over generations, were under intense scrutiny. The federal investigation, spurred by Amina's evidence and the subsequent whistleblowers, had uncovered a vast web of fraud, coercion, and systemic racism that had dispossessed countless black families. Then came the twist. Amina's lawyer, having conferred quietly with her, cleared his throat. "Your Honor, while the prosecution is pursuing the full extent of the law against Mr. Collier, Commander Brooks has proposed an alternative, or rather, an addition, to the terms of Mr. Collier's sentencing and the restitution for his victims." Collier, surprised, looked up, a flicker of bewildered hope in his eyes. He expected a demand for more money, perhaps, or a public apology. He was wrong. Commander Brooks stipulates, the lawyer continued, his voice steady, that in addition to the mandated prison time and financial penalties, Mr. Collier will publicly confess to his crimes, detailing the full scope of his racist land grabs, the coercion, the fraud, and the complicity of any officials involved. This confession will be recorded and released to the public. Collier blanched. A confession? No, that's humiliation. Mr. Collier, Amina interjected, her voice calm but piercing. What you inflicted on generations of families, what you attempted to do to me, that was calculated destruction. This is accountability, her lawyer pressed on. Furthermore, as part of a plea agreement, Mr. Collier will be required to fund, personally and irrevocably, a significant endowment to roots and resilience. This endowment will be dedicated specifically to providing legal aid, financial assistance, and educational resources to black farmers in this county and beyond, assisting them in reclaiming lost lands and protecting their current holdings. This fund will be independently administered, with no oversight from Mr. Collier or his family. The room was silent. This was not just about punishment. It was about redemption, not for Collier, but for the countless lives he had ruined. It was about turning the tools of his oppression into instruments of liberation. It was about forcing the oppressor to fund the very movement that would dismantle his legacy. Collier's lawyer protested vehemently, arguing it was an excessive and unprecedented demand. But the federal judge, seeing the brilliant, poetic justice in the proposal, simply nodded. "Mr. Collier, you have very little leverage left. Your choice is a full confession in this endowment, or a trial where the full weight of federal and state charges will be brought against you, with the near certainty of a maximum sentence and the utter ruin of your family's name. The choice is yours." Collier looked at Amina, his eyes filled with a mixture of hatred and grudging respect. He had met his match, a force far beyond his comprehension. He had tried to break her, to steal her legacy, and instead, she had systematically dismantled his. He closed his eyes, his shoulders slumping in defeat. I'll confess," he rasped, his voice barely audible. The confession was indeed recorded, a chilling account of generations of systematic racial discrimination and land theft, all funded by Collier himself. The endowment to roots and resilience was established, a constant, tangible reminder of his downfall and the enduring power of resistance. Amina Brooks returned to her farm, not to quiet anonymity, but to a new role. She became a national symbol of resistance, her story inspiring countless others. Her farm, once a battleground, became a beacon of hope and a hub for roots and resilience, a place where Black farmers gathered, shared knowledge, and found strength. She often hosted workshops on property rights, sustainable farming, and community organizing. Her wisdom and quiet strength guiding a new generation. The public exposure had not just brought down Collier and his corrupt network, it had ignited a movement. Lawmakers began to re-examine outdated land laws and discriminatory practices. More attention was brought to the historic injustices faced by Black farmers. Amina, the Delta Force commander, had not just defended her farm, she had fundamentally shifted the landscape of justice, proving that true power lay not in intimidation, but in unwavering integrity in the strategic pursuit of truth. She was no longer just a farmer. She was a living, breathing testament to resilience, a symbol that resonated across the nation, an embodiment of defiance that had transformed a personal battle into a movement for systemic change.